If you've ever spent decades pouring your soul into something, into someone, only to be thanked with silence, with distance, with being made invisible right when you thought you'd finally be seen, then maybe you'll understand this story. Maybe you'll recognize the quiet shift, the moment your title changes without anyone saying it out loud. First, your mom, then your cues. Then, suddenly, you're not even on the guest list. And if that hasn't happened to you yet, just wait. Life has a funny way of revealing who was watching the whole time and who was only waiting for their turn at the wheel. They used to call me the Iron Widow of West Texas. Not to my face, of course, but the oil men, the board members, the folks who'd show up in starched suits smelling like money and old whiskey. They said it behind closed doors. They said it with awe, sometimes with resentment. I never cared, because while they were talking, I was building. I started Carter Oil and Resources when I was 34. My husband Mark had just passed away. Car crash on Route 290, rain-slicked road, drunk teenager in a borrowed truck. It happened fast, they said. No pain, just gone. And with him went our mortgage payments, our savings, and the father of a 2-year-old boy who still cried when he couldn't find his bedtime bear. I had nothing but a GED, a toddler on my hip, and a knack for reading people. So I sold the house we barely owned, moved in with my sister for 4 months, and started knocking on doors. Not the doors of executives, no, I wasn't stupid. I started with field workers, site supervisors, the men who actually touched the rigs. I asked questions, wrote things down, brought sandwiches to meetings I wasn't invited to until they stopped kicking me out. One of them, Wendell Burke, he gave me my first shot. Said I reminded him of a younger version of his mother who used to run a tractor repair shop and never lost a finger. He handed me a referral, and from that one lead, I built a subcontractor network strong enough to bid on real work. By the time I was 41, Carter Oil had 38 employees, 3 trucks, and a reputation for showing up on time and getting things done under budget. By 50, we were drilling in 3 states, and Thomas, my Thomas, grew up in the back seat of a Ford F-150 with blueprints and lunch boxes, listening to me haggle with contractors and quietly writing his math homework on rig manifests. He was the reason I worked like I did. Every school play, every science fair, every broken heart. He always had me in the front row. I never remarried. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to split my time between another man's ego and my boy's future. When Thomas got into Stanford, I cried in the shower. Not because I was sad, but because it felt like maybe the universe had taken my grief and turned it into something beautiful. He studied business and engineering, interned at renewable energy firms, always came home for Thanksgiving, sent me postcards when he traveled, brought his college friends to the ranch, and introduced me as the toughest woman alive. I didn't need flowers. I didn't need a parade. That line alone, the toughest woman alive, carried me through every moment I questioned myself. But as the years went on, things began to shift. The phone calls got shorter, the updates more curated. When he started dating Riley, I noticed the subtle edits. My name becoming Mama Carter in past tense, like I was folklore. She was charming, perfectly filtered, always with a soft laugh and a curated vocabulary. She called our oil operations your legacy project and told Thomas they should think about repositioning the Carter brand. I thought it was a phase. I thought once they got married, they'd settle into the real world and remember who paid for the ground they stood on. But something strange started happening. I was being slowly moved out of pictures, literally. Invitations stopped including +1, in case I brought someone. Family meetings became Zoom calls I wasn't looped into. And my assistant, Elaine, started getting nervous when legal documents arrived from Thomas's office. Still, I brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking, that this was just the discomfort of transition, the natural tug of war between a generation handing off and one receiving. But here's the truth. I wasn't handing anything off. Not yet. And no one asked if I was ready. This isn't just a revenge story. This is a story about memory, about watching the people you sacrificed everything for slowly forget that you didn't just support the dream, they were your dream. So when the wedding invitation came and I saw my name listed not as mother of the groom, but just Evelyn Carter, under the section labeled extended family, something inside me shifted. Not snapped, just moved, like a plate settling after a long, quiet earthquake. And I knew this wasn't going to be the celebration I thought it would be. It was the start of a reckoning. I showed up in a cream linen suit. No sequins. No bright lipstick, just simple, pressed, and quiet. The way women dress when they know the room wasn't built to include them, but they show up anyway. The Carter estate had never looked shinier. White roses everywhere. Mason jars pretending to be elegant. Gold trim place cards, hand calligraphed menus with locally sourced, sustainable, organic stamped on the bottom like a badge of honor. It looked more like a styled shoot for a bridal magazine than a wedding. Maybe that was the point. I walked in through the front hall unescorted and found the seating chart near the main archway. Names were printed in looping script on heavy ivory cardstock. I scanned the list twice before I found mine. Ms. Evelyn Carter, table 19. 19. I didn't even need to ask where it was. I knew. Tables 1 through 4 were under the tent canopy near the couple's table. Tables 5 through 10 circled the dance floor. By the time you got to 19, you were practically at the property line. When I arrived, I saw the truth with my own eyes. Table 19 was tucked behind the bar cart and the server station, next to a swinging kitchen door that kept flapping open and shut like an insult on repeat. The air smelled like garlic butter and melted candles. There were 2 empty chairs, a man I didn't recognize, and a cousin I hadn't seen in 12 years. No view of the altar, no view of my son. I stood there for a moment, silent. That's what happens when the cut is so clean you don't bleed right away. "Ma'am, do you need help finding your seat?" a server asked kindly, balancing a tray of lemon spritzers. "No," I said. I just did. It was then I saw Riley, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, in the distance. She wore ivory, not white, a deliberate styling choice, I'm sure. Her hair was in that effortless wave rich girl's master by age 24. She leaned in and said something to her assistant. Then her eyes brushed past me like I was decor. Not offensive, just irrelevant. I didn't approach her. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat. The music started. A string quartet ironically playing a slowed-down version of "Here Comes the Sun." I watched it all from the corner like a server without a tray. And then it happened. A waiter approached Riley and whispered something in her ear. She nodded toward the kitchen. Her voice light and sweet said, "That table? That's where the help usually sits." The help? I could pretend she didn't mean me, that it was a mistake. But the glance she gave, cool, controlled, deliberate, told me she knew exactly who was seated there, and it was on purpose. No one gasped. This wasn't a soap opera, just a room full of expensive perfume and unspoken hierarchy. My son didn't say a word. He stood by the sweetheart table, fixing his cufflinks and chuckling with Riley's cousin about hedge fund returns like nothing had happened. That, more than the table, more than the title, was what gutted me. The silence. The willful blindness. If you're still here listening, let me ask you something. Has anyone ever treated you like background music in a moment you thought you'd be the centerpiece? If so, leave a comment and let me know. Not because I need sympathy, but because maybe someone else reading it will finally realize they're not alone. Elaine appeared beside me. She hadn't touched her wine. Her eyes met mine with that same quiet understanding we've always had. I gave her a small nod. "We're fine," I whispered, though my voice had to push through a knot in my throat. "They'll need your grace more than ever now." The ceremony dragged on with Instagram vows and curated tears. I clapped when expected, smiled when needed. I didn't eat much. The roast chicken was under-seasoned, and my appetite had disappeared somewhere between the wine cart and my last nerve. Afterward, they moved us to the dinner tent. I walked slowly, waiting to see where I'd be placed again. Surely they wouldn't. They did. Same table, same place. But now, next to a guest labeled Harper's Pilates coach and someone's college roommate's mom. I didn't even get a seat near extended family. When Thomas got up to speak, I thought maybe he'd say something. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, lifting his glass, especially my mother, Evelyn. Evelyn. No mom. No who built this company. Just Evelyn, like I was a minor donor to a fundraiser he half remembered. "She helped make all this possible," he added, past tense, like I had died quietly somewhere off stage. I looked at him, calm. Not angry, not broken, just empty. That was the moment I realized. I was no longer being honored. I was being phased out, like an old logo, like an original that no longer fit the rebrand. I sipped my water. No champagne for me. Riley had selected a biodynamic rosé to match her aesthetic. I never liked grapefruit notes anyway. The toasts rolled on. Someone made a joke about legacy with a modern twist. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed, but the air had changed. And I sat there like an afterthought with good posture. It would take just one call, to change everything. But not yet. That would come soon, very soon. You ever sit in a room filled with people you helped raise, built up, carried, fought for, and realize not one of them remembers who set the table they're now eating from? That's what it felt like. Not betrayal with daggers. No, it was subtler, slicker, like I'd been erased without a sound. After the toast, I excused myself and walked toward the back of the tent, where the servers were clearing plates and no one was paying attention to the woman in cream linen who didn't belong. I needed air, not because it was hot, but because I couldn't breathe around all that performance. I wandered toward the cocktail area. That's when I saw the slideshow playing near the dessert bar. It was a digital montage, beautifully edited, drone footage of the ranch, childhood pictures of Thomas, grainy clips from football games, beach vacations, his graduation. The music swelled, soft and elegant, but I wasn't in a single frame. Not one. Not the birthday I planned with paper plates and balloons in our backyard. Not the trip to Galveston where I carried him on my hip across a shell-strewn beach. Not even the photo of us in hard hats standing outside our first drilling site, where I signed a lease with trembling hands and a fire in my chest. I watched Riley's face flash on the screen, smiling in matching sweaters with Thomas, laughing while holding coffee at the airport, fake candid shots of them working together at a laptop, all curated, all polished, all conveniently skipping the decades before she ever learned his middle name. And then it happened. The screen shifted to the final image, big bold letters across a minimalist backdrop. Carter Energy, Legacy, Reimagined. Legacy, Reimagined. I felt it like a knife between the ribs. They weren't just skipping me, they were rewriting the entire narrative. And I was no longer part of it. Just then, a group of young women walked past, all in matching sage dresses. Riley's bridal party. One of them gestured toward the screen and said, "I love how Riley and Thomas made this brand feel so fresh, like a true power couple, not weighed down by old history." I didn't turn around. I didn't speak. But inside, I crumbled. Old history. That's what I'd become. Not founder, not mother, just background noise. I walked back to my table, table 19, of course, and sat in silence while a waiter placed a slice of lemon elderflower cake in front of me. I didn't touch it. Elaine reached over, gently pushed her glass of water toward me. I nodded. She didn't ask questions. She never has to. Because when you've walked beside someone for 30 years, you recognize the look that says, "I just got deleted from my own story." By the time dinner ended, the DJ was queuing up the couple's first dance. The crowd gathered close. I didn't move. I didn't need to. They wouldn't notice my absence. The music played, something acoustic and filtered through Riley's Spotify aesthetic. I closed my eyes. I could still hear the hum of the generator from our first oil rig in Pecos County. I remembered standing there, hard hat too big, boots too stiff, watching that drill pierce the earth like we had a right to hope again. And I remembered Thomas, age 8, bringing me lemonade in a cup he made from duct tape and determination, whispering, "We're going to be rich someday, right, Mama?" Back then, he said Mama with all the weight of love. Now he said Evelyn like it was a formality, a footnote. Funny, isn't it? How love can turn to leverage, how memory can be curated until the truth doesn't fit the feed. That night, after the dancing began and the guests got loud enough not to notice, I walked into the bridal lounge. It was empty, smelled like gardenias and overpriced candles. I stood in front of the mirror. No mascara smudges, no red eyes, just a woman who had given everything and been thanked with absence. I reached into my clutch, pulled out the small silver locket I always carried. Inside was a picture. Thomas at 5, cheeks sticky with chocolate cake, arms around my neck, grinning like I was the center of his world. That photo wasn't in the slideshow either. I didn't cry. I just sat and waited, because the time for tears had passed. Now came something colder, clearer. They thought I would fade, but I had one more thing left, the one thing they never expected. A line they couldn't cross without consequences, a legacy they couldn't edit once I picked up the phone, and by morning, that phone call would be made. The rain came slow at first, a drizzle, polite and apologetic, like it didn't want to interrupt the performance. The crowd under the tent giggled. Someone made a joke about good luck and marriage. The music played louder to drown the weather out, but I welcomed it. It gave me a reason to step outside. I walked behind the catering van and onto the grass at the edge of the vineyard, where the ground was uneven and soft beneath my heels. The further I walked, the quieter it got. By the time I reached the tree line, I could hear my breath again. I could feel the world return to its proper scale. No curated playlists, no curated memories, just mud, oak, and the steady ache behind my ribs. I pulled my phone from my clutch. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I doubted what needed to be done, but because I had once promised myself I'd never use power to hurt family. Then again, this wasn't about hurting. This was about stopping the slow erasure of everything I bled for. I dialed. 3 rings, then a voice. Steady, warm, familiar. "Charles here." "Cancel the disbursement to Carter Renewables," I said. A pause. Then, "All of it?" "Yes. All 12 million. He exhaled slowly. "Is everything all right, Evelyn?" "No," I said, "but it will be. I'll send you something in writing by morning." He didn't push. He's known me too long. Known the tone I use when something's cracked deep beneath the surface, and no amount of gloss will patch it. I hung up. That was it. 12 seconds. 1 sentence. 35 years of reputation and equity rerouted with a thumb and a voice. I looked out over the vineyard. Rain misted the air, softening everything. The rows of grapevines glistened like secrets under pressure. Somewhere behind me, the tent roared with applause, probably for Riley's surprise dance or whatever performance they'd rehearsed. But this was my moment. Not one that anyone saw, not one that got posted, but one that mattered. Because when people start rewriting history, they don't just change the past, they steal your place in the present. And that day, under that tree, I took it back, quietly, efficiently, like a woman who's had to defend herself before. I remember the first time I signed a check over $100,000. My hand shook so badly I had to steady it on the table. That deal built the foundation for what would become Carter Oil. And now, just like that day, I felt the same tremor in my fingertips. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was grief. Grief not for what I lost, but for what I realized never existed the way I believed. Thomas didn't forget me overnight. Riley didn't disrespect me by accident. This was gradual, planned, curated, like that damn slideshow. It wasn't the wedding that broke me. It was the proof that I'd already been written out before the chairs were even arranged. And still, I didn't hate them. That's the cruelest part of motherhood. You don't stop loving the people who hurt you. You just stop pretending they'll stop. As I made my way back toward the tent, my shoes were soaked, hemline dotted with mud. A younger version of me might have cared. But now, it felt like armor. Like I'd finally stepped into the part of this story that belonged to me. I caught Elaine's eye across the lawn. She was waiting near the car. I gave her the smallest nod. She didn't ask what happened, just opened the passenger door and started the engine. Inside the car, the music was off, just windshield wipers and breathing. "You okay?" she asked after a few miles. I looked out the window. Raindrops streaked down like slow tears. "I will be," I said. Silence again. Then she added, "Whatever it is, I'm with you." I almost smiled, because for the first time in days, I didn't feel erased. Not completely. There's something strange about silence after a storm. It's not peace, not yet. It's the quiet before your own voice finally has room to speak again. The day after the wedding, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't write long letters or break things. I woke up early, made myself coffee, black, 2 sugars, and sat at the kitchen table in my robe, listening to the birds and the distant hum of a world still spinning. Elaine was already at her desk, going through legal papers. I looked at her and said, "Let's pull up the shareholder structure." She didn't blink. She just opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. You see, Riley and Thomas had been quietly moving pieces. A few months earlier, I'd transferred 10% of Carter Oil to Thomas. More symbolic than strategic. A gesture. A mother's offering. He was my only child, after all. I thought he'd treat it like a sacred inheritance. Instead, he'd taken that 10% and used it as a bargaining chip. Wrangled his way into meetings, nudged himself into contracts I hadn't signed off on. Riley, with her perfect teeth and soft voice, had suggested streamlining executive decisions. They had even floated the idea that I should consider retirement. But now I saw the deeper move. They weren't just angling for control. They had filed preliminary paperwork with a family court judge, requesting an evaluation for conservatorship on me. I stared at the screen. Words like mental competence and capacity and declining executive function leapt out like bullets. They said I'd been forgetting names, that I'd repeated stories, that I had struggled with managing complex financial matters. It was a case being built in the shadows, not to protect me, but to replace me. I looked down at my hands, steady, sharp. These fingers had signed every deal, had typed every clause, had patched holes in contracts and scraped up payroll during oil crashes. And now they were trying to say those hands no longer knew what they were doing. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to legally erase me, with the blessing of a court. That's when it hit me. I wasn't mourning my son. I was mourning the illusion of him. The idea that because I had loved him well, he would protect that love in return. I had been wrong, but I would not be erased. Not quietly, not legally, not emotionally, and most of all, not by the very people who had stood on the foundation I built. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside, letters, deeds, old contracts, original stake documents, paper trails, proof that Carter Energy was not a brand, it was my life. And no slideshow, no new font, no strategic transition could scrub that out. Elaine and I spent the next 2 days assembling a file, not to sue, not to smear, just to remind them, remind the bank, remind the board, remind Thomas that I was not confused, I was not declining, I was done pretending I needed their approval to exist. You know what power really is? It's not yelling in a boardroom. It's not throwing punches or slamming doors. It's sitting in your own house, in your own name, and deciding not to explain yourself anymore. I sent Thomas a single email. "Thomas, please be informed that the pending review regarding conservatorship has been documented. All relevant entities have been notified. I wish you clarity and integrity in the life ahead of you. I'll be living mine as I always have, on my own terms. No greeting, no closing, just truth." The next morning, my lawyer called. Apparently, the court petition had been quietly withdrawn. No explanation filed, no apology sent. But I didn't need it, because something inside me had shifted. I no longer needed to be thanked, not for the diapers I changed. Not for the nights I stayed up watching fevers break, not for the companies I built or the name I gave him, because those thank yous were never going to come. And when you stop waiting for them, you get your life back. I didn't move out of the ranch house. People expected I would. They thought I'd sell everything, run away to a beach town, maybe start posting cryptic quotes about healing and rebirth. But I stayed, because this house wasn't theirs to take away from me. Not in spirit, not in title. I planted tomatoes. It started with a little patch behind the barn, just soil, seeds, and an old spade I found leaning against the fence. I hadn't gardened in years. My knees cracked every time I bent down. But there was something honest about digging your fingers into dirt again, something real. Each morning I'd brew coffee, tie up my hair, and walk barefoot out to check on the seedlings. Some days they were drooping, some days they flourished, but they always reminded me of one thing: what's tended with care will rise again, quietly, steadily, and without applause. Elaine still came by, though less for work and more to sit on the porch swing and gossip about town. I liked that. We didn't talk about the wedding, or the court documents, or the silence that came after my email to Thomas. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require discussion. They just settle. Word got out, of course. People in town started whispering. Some called to ask if I was okay. Others danced around the subject, worried I'd become fragile like porcelain. But what they didn't understand was, I wasn't broken. I was clean. You don't realize how much weight you're carrying until it's no longer on your back. One afternoon, I drove to an old drilling site we shut down years ago, Pecos No. 4. I hadn't been there in a decade. It was just rusted fences, dried brush, and sun-bleached storage tanks now. But I wanted to see it. I walked out across the field in boots that still held oil stains from the 90s. I touched the old rig control box and remembered standing there in winter, arguing with a supplier over a delivery delay while Thomas napped in my truck. He couldn't have been older than 6. That moment rushed back so fast it nearly knocked the wind out of me. But instead of crying, I smiled, because I could finally look at that memory without pain. Not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed it to justify my worth. And maybe that's the moment I started healing for real. Not when I canceled the payment, not when they dropped the conservatorship, but when I remembered that I was someone before they forgot me. You ever feel that? That moment when you realize you were whole before anyone ever said you weren't. If you have, tell me in the comments. Just say, I remember who I was? Maybe someone else reading needs to hear that today. By summer, the tomatoes were ripening. I canned the first batch myself, burned my fingers a little, laughed harder than I had in months. I mailed a jar to my sister in Austin, gave 2 to the mailman's wife, and left 3 on the steps of the church without a note. I didn't sign them, didn't need to. The people who needed to know knew. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun set in orange streaks across the sky and thought about what kind of woman I had become. Not the one I was at 34, with a baby and a blueprint. Not the one in the linen suit at table 19, but someone new. Someone whose story didn't end with a slideshow, and definitely not with being seated by the kitchen door. It happened at the grocery store. I was standing in the cereal aisle holding a box of granola when a woman I hadn't seen in years turned the corner with her cart. "Evelyn?" she asked, like she wasn't sure it was really me. I smiled. "Hi, Deborah." She blinked, then gave me that polite, tight-lipped expression women use when they were about to ask something they probably shouldn't. "I heard about the wedding," she started, then quickly added, "Well, I didn't go, of course, but someone said you looked lovely." "Thanks," I said, placing the granola in my cart. She hovered, clearly unsure how to continue. Then came the real question. "And how is Thomas doing? I mean, he must be so busy now with Riley and the company and all." I looked at her, just looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the space. Because the truth was, I didn't know how Thomas was doing, and more importantly, I didn't need to. "Oh, I wouldn't know," I said calmly. "We haven't spoken in a while." Deborah blinked. "Oh, I'm so sorry." But I wasn't, not anymore, because something had changed. That moment in the grocery aisle confirmed it. I wasn't Thomas's mom anymore, at least not in the way people used to define me. And strangely, it didn't sting. It felt freeing. I walked out of the store with my head higher than it had been in years, not out of pride, but peace. A few days later, I went to the community center. There was a flyer on the bulletin board asking for volunteers to help with adult literacy classes. I took one of the little tabs with the phone number and called that afternoon. "Evelyn Carter," I told the woman on the phone. "I used to run a business. I've got time now, and I know how to listen." That's how it started. Monday nights, 6:30 p.m., room 204. 12 adults, mostly women, some older than me. One wore a trucker hat every class. Another always brought peach candy and offered it to everyone, even though no one ever took it. They didn't care about my last name. They didn't ask about oil or weddings or who I used to be. They just listened. And slowly, I started to speak again. Not in defense, not in explanation, but in full sentences that weren't about anyone else. Just me. I told them stories about negotiating leases in my 30s, about falling asleep in motel parking lots between meetings, about cooking boxed mac and cheese with Thomas on the nights we were too broke for anything else. They laughed. Sometimes they cried, and every once in a while someone would stay after class to ask, "How did you get through it?" And I'd say, "You don't get through it. You walk beside it until one day it doesn't hold the same power anymore." One night, as I was locking up, one of the women, Marla, caught me in the parking lot. "You're not what I expected," she said. "When I first saw you, I thought, this woman looks like she has everything put together. But you've been through hell." I nodded. Most women have. And we smiled. Because we both understood something unsaid. Pain is universal, but silence doesn't have to be. Later that week, I went to a small business seminar in town. Not to lead it, but to learn. I wanted to understand digital marketing, social media, how people built things now without oil and rigs and handshakes over bourbon. I took notes, asked questions, sat next to a woman named Denise who sold handmade soaps out of her garage and wanted to build a Shopify page. We exchanged numbers. It felt good, not because I had plans to launch anything, but because I could learn again. For me. Not for legacy, not for anyone's pride, just curiosity. That was something I hadn't felt in a long time. You see, when you spend decades being someone's mother, people assume that's all you are, that you're frozen in that one identity. And when that child no longer needs you, or worse, erases you, it can feel like you don't exist at all. But I've learned, you don't disappear. You just shift. You unfold. You rise, quietly, without asking permission. And if no one claps, that's fine. Because this chapter isn't for applause. It's for me. The first email came on a Thursday. Subject line, "Quick check-in here from Thomas." No greeting, no warmth, just a 3-line message asking if I'd be open to reconnecting soon. His assistant was copied. There was a link to a calendar. I didn't respond, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't owe him my presence anymore. You see, when someone makes a seat for you at the kitchen door while strangers toast in your name, that's not an oversight. That's a choice. And silence can be one too. The next message was from Riley. This one was longer, carefully worded. Said she'd been thinking about the importance of family, mentioned some generational wisdom I could offer, asked if I'd consider sharing more of my story for a possible brand campaign. I almost laughed. Now that I'd stepped out of their script, they wanted to rewrite me back in. As a character I never agreed to be. But I wasn't a story to be repurposed. I was a woman who had lived it, and then kept living when the lights went off. A week passed, then 2. I kept teaching my literacy class. Marla brought me tomatoes from her own garden. Denise invited me to a maker's fair where she sold out her soaps in 2 hours. I clapped for her so loud my hands stung. That night, as I walked home from the fair, I passed by a billboard I hadn't noticed before. It was for Carter Renewables. Sleek font, soft lighting, and there they were, Thomas and Riley, smiling like America's next power couple. The slogan read, "The future is forward." I stood across the street, cars rushing behind me, and I realized something strange. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I felt clarity. They were building something, and I no longer needed to be part of it, because I had already built something stronger. Myself. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. From Thomas. The envelope was thick. Good paper, like the kind you use when you want to seem sincere. Inside, he wrote about missing me, about how things got lost in the shuffle, and how we're still family. He didn't mention the conservatorship. He didn't mention seating me by the kitchen. He didn't apologize. Just asked if I wanted to come to Thanksgiving. That was the moment I knew he'd started to feel it. The absence. Not because I yelled, not because I took them to court, but because I walked away, quietly, and meant it. The people who think they can erase you don't expect you to disappear with dignity. They expect tears, rage, a messy scene. But when you respond with silence, with peace, with a life rebuilt from the ground up, it unsettles them. Because they start to wonder what they really lost and what they gave up trying to gain power over you. I placed the letter on my table. I made tea. I stared out at my garden, almost fall now. The tomatoes gone, replaced by sturdy kale and cold weather squash. Everything has a season, even motherhood, even grief, even obligation. That night I wrote back, just one sentence. I hope you find peace with the choices you've made. No love, Mom. No signature. Just the kind of sentence that leaves space. Not for me to return, but for him to sit in what he built. I mailed it the next morning and didn't think about it again, because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for a seat at any table. Not for an apology. Not for recognition. I had my porch, my class, my garden, my life. That was enough. And for the first time in years, so was I. There was a young woman who sat alone in the corner of my literacy class. Always early, always quiet, never made eye contact unless she had to. Her name was Isabel, mid-20s maybe, worked nights at the nursing home, studied during breaks. She never volunteered to read aloud, but her worksheets were always perfect. She wrote in careful block letters, as if each word cost something. One night after class, I stayed behind to organize materials. Isabel lingered by the door, half turned to leave, but not quite moving. I looked up. Something on your mind? She hesitated, then said, I was wondering, what made you start teaching here? You don't look like someone who needs to. I smiled. I needed to in a different way. She nodded slowly. My grandmother used to say, the ones who give quietly are the ones who gave the most when no one was looking. Her voice cracked a little on the word grandmother. I didn't ask questions, just said, that's a wise woman. The next week, she brought me banana bread wrapped in foil, said her aunt taught her tatat, left it on my desk without a word, and for some reason it moved me more than any gift I'd gotten in the last decade. I began to notice things, how she never used the front parking lot because her car backfired so loudly she was embarrassed, how she took 2 buses to get to class and once stayed even when her shoes were soaked through from the rain. One evening, I offered her a ride home. She hesitated, then said yes. She lived in a 1-bedroom above a laundromat, a place that smelled like detergent and old coins. She showed me her bookshelf, just 2 cookbooks and a stack of printed worksheets from class. I keep every lesson, she said. They make me feel like I'm not invisible. Something cracked open inside me then. Not pain, not memory, but something like recognition. She wasn't me. But she carried a familiar weight. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter. Then I called Charles, my estate planner. There's someone I want to help, I said. Quietly. He didn't ask who, just listened. We set up a fund, not large enough to change her world overnight, but enough to buy a car that wouldn't backfire, to move into a place with quieter walls, to give her space to dream without a time clock pressing against her ribs. I never told her it was me. I let the letter come from a community support foundation that didn't exist last month, because this wasn't about legacy or gratitude. It was about breaking the chain. You see, I spent most of my life giving to people who thought they were entitled to it. This time, I gave to someone who'd never ask, but would use it wisely, and I didn't need to be thanked. That's the difference between needing to be seen and being at peace with who you are. It's funny how we spend so much of our lives chasing validation until one day we realize it's the smallest acts, done in silence, that rebuild us from the inside out. Have you ever helped someone without needing them to know? If you have, share it in the comments, not to brag, but to remind someone else that kindness doesn't always need an audience. A few weeks later, Isabel came to class with a quiet smile I hadn't seen before. She didn't say anything, but she read aloud that night, for the first time. Her voice trembled on the first sentence, then steadied, clear, strong. The whole class clapped when she finished. She sat down, cheeks pink, eyes shining, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, not victory, but peace. Because giving without being seen is one of the last freedoms left to us when the world tries to make us invisible. And I had chosen it, on purpose, with love. The letter arrived just after lunch, slipped beneath the door like a guilty whisper. I glanced at it. Cream-colored stationery, my name in Riley's neat script. And I already knew what it contained before I tore it open. Inside, a single-sheet apology that read polite enough, almost cordial. I realize now that my actions hurt you in ways I can't fully explain, followed by a neatly folded check for $5,200, drawn on my own Carter Energy account. Memo line, garden repairs and estate maintenance. They assumed money could fix the holes they'd poked in my soul. I set the letter and check on the kitchen island. The overhead light cast a pale glow. Late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the marble countertop. I made myself a glass of iced tea, sweet, 2 sugars, as I stared at the check. $5,200, a neat round number, probably calculated to cover some minor expense, the kind you'd buy supplies for an outdoor event. Or maybe a planter box. Who knows? But I did. I knew exactly where that figure came from. A spreadsheet Riley sent to the estate manager 2 weeks before the wedding. Umbrella rentals, $800. Table linens floral branded, $1,200. Mason jar centerpieces purchase, $600. Garden lighting installation, $1,300. Miscellaneous decor. Consultation fees, $1,200. Total, $5,200. Every penny came from me. Every line item included my name as contributing sponsor. They'd hidden behind spreadsheets and polite conversations, using my own resources to finance an event that was meant to exclude me. Now here they were, offering to make things right, with the exact amount I'd already paid, like giving a drowning person a single breath of air and expecting gratitude. I opened the check, studied the signature, my own handwriting scanned and printed, a forged signature of E. Carter without my middle name, without the care I'd always taken to curl the lowercase t's just so. I didn't cry. I set the tea down, took a deep breath, and reached for the check. I tore it in half, then half again until it was a ragged scrap. I didn't crumple it. I placed each piece in an envelope addressed to the bank, along with a brief letter, to whom it may concern. This check was issued without my authorization. Signature is forged. Please investigate this transaction as potential fraud. Sincerely, Evelyn M. Carter. I sealed the envelope, labeled it urgent, fraudulent activity, and handed it to Elaine. She looked at me, eyebrows raised, but didn't say a word. She took the envelope and added it to her stack of daily tasks. Later that afternoon, the bank called, a gentle inquiry at first. Miss Carter, we received your letter regarding a check. Are you safe? Do you need immediate assistance? The banker's voice was concerned without being patronizing. I'm fine, I said, but I want to press charges. This goes beyond a mistake. They promised to follow up within 48 hours and advised me not to cash any new checks from Thomas or Riley until the issue was resolved. I hung up and wrote a short email to Thomas. Thomas, please be advised that any further unauthorized transactions will be formally prosecuted. I will not tolerate my name being used as collateral for family theatrics. Evelyn, no love or sincerely. Just the facts, delivered firmly. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The air had that crisp edge fall always brings. The garden lights I once paid for now flickered like distant memories. I didn't mind. I thought about what they'd tried to do, casting me as a merchant bank, a sponsor, a silent ATM, then offering the exact change as if that erased their entitlement. I smiled, because I realized that boundaries don't need explanations. They only need to be drawn and respected. A gust of wind stirred the maple leaves overhead. I sipped my tea and thought of the people I'd helped before. Isabel, Marla, Denise, all women who needed someone to believe in them. I'd never asked for recognition, never wanted applause. But Riley and Thomas had tried to write me out, then slip back in with a check. They didn't understand that I wasn't an account number to balance. I was a force of nature. Quiet, yes, but unyielding. The next morning, I received confirmation. The check was flagged, the account secured, and my report forwarded to the fraud department. They'd launched an internal review. I forwarded that confirmation to my lawyer, who replied, "You did exactly the right thing. Maung, they'll think twice before ever touching your funds again." I closed my laptop and went into my study. I pulled down a small wooden plaque from the shelf, one I'd carved decades ago with my own hands. It read, "A woman's worth is not measured by what she pays, but by what she protects." I hung it back, centered above the desk. At noon, I went back to the community center to teach my literacy class. As always, there was no fanfare, no gossip about the family drama, just people waiting for lessons, for stories, for a quiet reminder that they mattered. Isabel waved me over and said softly, "You know, someone told me you turned down that check." I paused. "I did." She smiled like she understood the weight behind that simple act. We looked at each other, teacher and student. Two women who'd given without asking, who'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift is refusing to be bought. The class ended, and as everyone packed up, I caught someone's eye in the back row. A middle-aged man holding a folder. He approached me as I gathered my things. "Ms. Cartas," he said, clearing his throat. "I didn't know how to say this in front of everyone, but I'm part of the fraud unit at the bank. I just wanted to say, thank you." I blinked. "Thank you for your courage, for showing that a person's name is more than a signature. It's their story, and you reminded us of that." I nodded, speechless for once. He shook my hand, pressed a card into my palm, and walked away. Later, I looked at the card. It wasn't a phone number for interviews. It was a contact for volunteer work with a women's financial advocacy group. He didn't need to say it, but I knew the message. You're not invisible. No commentary needed. No check required. I folded the card gently, placed it in my pocket, and went home. That night, I placed a new envelope in my drawer, this one addressed to Thomas and Riley. Inside, only one line. "Do not presume my absence. I am always present where I choose to be." I left it there, because for the first time, I knew exactly where I belonged. I didn't send out invitations. I simply asked 6 women I trusted, women who'd weathered their own storms, who knew what it meant to build something lasting, to meet me at the garden pergola on a Thursday morning. No press, no cameras, just linen-draped tables and the soft hum of cicadas. They arrived one by one, dressed in light neutrals that fluttered in the summer breeze. There was Marjorie, retired state trooper turned community organizer; Claire, former magazine editor, whose byline I once envied; Judge Franklin's wife, Linda, whose discreet influence steered more than a few local policies; Patricia, a philanthropist I taught at a fundraiser; Nora, the museum patron; and May, the retired school principal with a heart of gold. Elaine greeted them at the gate and offered iced tea in crystal glasses. I watched from the far end of the pergola, adjusting my own cream blouse. No jewelry, no flash, just me, exactly as I wanted to be seen, unadorned and honest. When everyone was settled, I raised my glass, not champagne but plain water, and said, "Thank you all for coming. I didn't want fanfare, but I did want company." A few soft smiles and nods. They'd known me long enough to understand understatement. "I'm not here to talk about the wedding," I went on, voice steady, "or a certain family drama. A gentle chuckle rippled through them. What I want to share is this. I will not be passing Carter energy on to the next generation. Their eyes met mine, surprise mixed with curiosity. I paused. I know tradition says you hand a crown to your heir, but I believe legacy is something you live, not something you leave behind. I could see a flicker of recognition in Linda's eyes. She'd chaired more than one board transition in her life. Instead of reading from a speech, I simply told them what I'd learned, that power was fragile when it rested on names and structures, but that kindness and opportunity could endure when given thoughtfully, without expectation. I've established a new fund, I said. It's called the Carter Women's Initiative. I watched their faces brighten. It will provide scholarships, startup grants, and mentorship for women in the engineering and energy sectors, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. I won't be sitting on the board. Elaine will oversee it, in trust. I gestured to Elaine, who gave a small nod. Patricia's eyes glistened. That is wonderful, Evelyn. Claire looked at me, quietly proud. Nora whispered, You give without wanting attention. I smiled. That's the point. I've carried a lot of things those past decades. Company names, board seats, expectations. Now I carry this. I raised one hand a little higher. This I believe in. They clapped, softly, sincerely. Not the hollow clatter of a staged photo op, but the genuine rhythm of gratitude. Linda leaned forward. When will you announce it to the public? She asked. I shook my head. I won't. It's a private foundation. The women who need it will find it through your networks and word of mouth. No press release, no photo lines. Their cheeks warmed. It felt like a revolution in slow motion. Marjorie, always direct, asked, And Carter Energy? She meant, what about the company itself? I met her gaze. It will carry on without me. I've passed governance to a council of trustees who share these values. Riley and Thomas were never invited. I let that hang. None of them flinched. They all knew exactly why. May leaned back, sipping her tea. Sometimes the fiercest power move is to step aside. She smiled, and I realized that's exactly what I'd done. We spent the next hour talking about how to spot the next generation of women who'd benefit, naming mentors, sharing contacts, mapping out outreach. Elaine took notes. I sat back and let the conversation flow, heart lighter than it had been in years. As they left one by one, they hugged me with genuine warmth. No agendas, no hidden motives. Nora paused at the gate. You've done more today than any boardroom speech could achieve. I turned to Elaine. Thank you for making this happen. She nodded, pushing her glasses up. It's my honor. The last to go was Linda. She kissed my cheek and said, You've built something no one can take away. That afternoon, I found a half-empty bottle of vintage rosé waiting on my desk, sent by Mrs. Davenport. No note, just the bottle. I poured a glass and sipped, savoring the moment. Outside, the cicadas sang on. The pergola stood empty, bathed in gentle light, ribbons of fabric fluttering in the breeze. I walked through the garden and paused at the old bench, where once I'd dreamed of my son's future. Now I glanced at the rose bushes I'd planted years ago, roses that still bloomed red and defiant. I raised my glass to the sky. Here's to legacy, I murmured. Here's to love you don't have to explain. No cameras, no applause, just me. And the knowledge that what I gave today would outlive any name on a spreadsheet. That evening, news of the Carter Women's Initiative spread quietly among the networks. Emails, a brief mention in a newsletter, whispered recommendations at a luncheon. Thomas found out through a colleague's post. Riley read about it in a forwarded note. They wasn't invited, but you can bet they noticed. Because the power of a quietly given gift is that it lasts. It doesn't fade or get rebranded. It just grows. And that, more than any court fight or contract cancellation, was my final statement. It was a Tuesday morning when I finally stepped into my old office, one last time. Elaine had already packed up the essentials, a few binders, a ceramic pen holder, the photo of me and my late husband standing beside the very first well we'd drilled. He was smiling. I was sunburnt and proud. Neither of us knew how far things would go, or how far they would fall. The room looked smaller than I remembered, less powerful somehow. I sat in the leather chair that once held every version of me, the founder, the mother, the fixer, the afterthought, and I breathed, just breathed. No nostalgia, no sadness, just presence. The board had sent flowers. One card read, "Thank you for your trailblazing vision." Another said, "We're grateful for your grace and grit." Funny how people love you most when you're leaving, but this wasn't exile. This was exit. Chosen, measured, mine. I stood, walked once around the desk, and looked out over the skyline. Buildings we once owned shares in, companies I once advised from behind closed doors. Now I looked at them like distant relatives, familiar, but no longer close. Back at home, I didn't unpack the office box. Instead, I planted tulip bulbs, red, yellow, violet, the kind that bloom strong but silent, returning each year without permission. As I worked, my phone buzzed. It was Isabel. "Miss Carter, they just emailed me. I got the grant. I'm going back to school." I smiled. I didn't need a thank you. But hearing the joy in her message was its own reward. "I hope you're proud of yourself." "Because I am." I replied, "You carry it now. Make something you believe in." A few days later, the museum emailed. They wanted to host a Legacy in Business luncheon, honoring women founders over 65. They asked if I'd attend. I politely declined, told them I'd send someone in my place. I recommended Denise, the soap maker. They didn't recognize the name. That made me smile more. Because true legacy isn't passed through applause. It's passed through possibility. At the community center, Marla told me she'd started a night class to teach basic bookkeeping. "You inspired me," she said. "I figured if you can start over at 70, I can start at 52. I didn't correct her about my age. Let her believe whatever gave her courage. That weekend, I got one final letter, this time handwritten, from Thomas. It was short. "I know you won't come back, and I don't blame you. I see now what I didn't see then. I'm sorry." No demands, no explanations, just one sentence that mattered. "I'm sorry." I placed the letter in a box beside my old family recipes, tucked it between lemon pie and chili for cold days. Let it stay there, part of the history, but not the future. On Sunday, I baked that lemon pie, took it to the park, shared it with my class, laughed with them as we sat in lawn chairs, peeling stories from our lives like old labels from jam jars. No one there called me Thomas's mother. No one whispered about wealth or what I'd lost. They just called me Evelyn, and that was enough. At sunset, as we packed up, Isabel pulled me aside. "Do you ever wish it ended differently?" I paused, looked out at the golden sky, thought about everything, about the wedding, the kitchen seat, the forged check, the silence, and I said, "I don't wish for different endings anymore. I just make sure I don't repeat old beginnings." She nodded like she understood, then walked ahead to join the others. I stayed back a moment, felt the air shift, soft, sure. It didn't feel like a victory parade. It felt like peace. And that was everything. You know, some stories don't end with applause. They end with stillness, with breath, with a life reclaimed, not loudly, but fully. And sometimes those are the strongest revenge stories of all. Let me ask you something. Quietly, like a friend might at the end of a long porch talk, have you ever chosen silence over shouting and found it more powerful than anything else? Share your moment in the comments if you feel safe. Someone out there might need your quiet victory today.